Introduction: the enduring question of poverty. For thousands of years, human civilization has evolved through dramatic transformations. Societies moved from primitive hunter-gatherers band to architectural settlers, from feudal kingdoms to industrial economies, and eventually into the modern globalized world driven by advanced technologies, finance, and scientific progress. Agricultural productivity has increased dramatically. Global trade networks span continents, and technological capabilities now allow humanity to produce more foods, goods, and services than at any point in history. Yet, despite this immense growth in productive capacity, poverty and hunger remain persistent realities across large parts of the world. Millions of people still live below the poverty line, lacking stable access to food, healthcare, education, and economic opportunity. This persistent presence of poverty raises a profound question. If civilization has existed for thousands of years and productivity has increased dramatically, why has poverty not disappeared? Understanding this question requires examining economic structures, historical developments, and social institutions, political incentives, psychological factors, and the distribution of power within the societies. Poverty as a structural feature of economic systems. One of the most important explanations for the persistence of poverty lies in the structure of nature of economic systems. Economic production generates wealth, but the distribution of wealth is determined by institutional arrangements, ownership patterns, and the power of relations. In most historical societies, a relatively small segment of the population has controlled the majority of productive assets such as land, capital, trade routes, or industrial infrastructure. This pattern existed in feudal agricultural societies where landlords controlled land, in colonial economies where imperial powers control resources, and in modern capitalist economies where capital ownership determines income flows. Because wealth tends to generate additional wealth through investment, interest, and accumulation, those who already possess capital often experience faster economic growth than those who rely solely on labor. Over time, this dynamic leads to persistent inequality. Economic growth doesn't automatically eliminate poverty because it increases in productivity can coexist with unequal distribution. When production expands but the ownership remains concentrated, poverty can continue even within economically advanced societies. Historical transformation and the persistence of inequality. Throughout history, economic progress has frequently reorganized inequality rather than eliminating it. The agricultural revolution thousands of years ago dramatically increased food production compared to hunter-gatherer societies. However, it also introduced land ownership, social hierarchy, and the system of taxation tribute that concentrated power in the hands of elites such as kings, nobles, and priests. The Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries created unprecedented wealth through mechanized production and technological innovation. However, it also produced harsh working conditions, urban poverty, and extreme disparity between industrial capitalists and laborers. Even in the 20th century, as many countries achieved remarkable economic growth, income inequality remained substantial, both within nations and between them. The historical pattern demonstrates that economic growth alone doesn't eliminate poverty. Instead, new systems of production often create new forms of inequality, redistributing power and resources in ways that leave large segments of the population economically vulnerable. The role of property, capital, and ownership. A central factor influencing poverty is the distribution of productive assets. Ownership of land, capital, and technology, as well as infrastructure, determines who benefits from economic activity. Individuals or groups that control these assets receives profits, rents, and dividends, while those without ownership rely primarily on wages. This distinction between capital income and labor income has profound consequences. Capital can generate passive income, compound over time, allowing wealth to grow across generations. Labor income, by contrast, is limited by the number of hours individuals can work and by the wage determined by labor markets. When capital ownership is concentrated, wealth accumulation becomes uneven, creating long run disparities between those who own productive resources and those who do not. Inheritance further reinforces this dynamic. Families that possess significant assets can transfer wealth, education, networks, and opportunities to future generations. Meanwhile, families without such resources must continually rebuild economic security from limited starting points. Demography, population growth, and resource pressure. Population growth has historically played a major role in shaping poverty dynamics. In many regions, population increases have placed pressures on land, employment opportunities, and natural resources. When the number of people grows faster than the available economic opportunities, wages may stagnate and the competition for resources intensify. In agrarian societies, land distribution among heirs could gradually reduce the size of individual landholdings, making farms less productive and pushing some family members into landless or wage labor. Even in modern economies, rapid population growth can strain infrastructure, education system, and labor markets, limiting the ability of societies to generate sufficient opportunities for all citizens. Although technological progress can increase productivity, demographic pressure often complicate the process of poverty reduction. Economic shocks and vulnerabilities. Another reason poverty persists is the vulnerability of households to economic shocks. Illness, natural disasters, job loss, financial crisis, or political instability can quickly destroy fragile economic security. Wealthier individuals typically possess savings, insurance, diversified assets, and social networks that allow them to absorb such shocks. Poor households, by contrast, often lack financial buffers and may fail into long-term poverty after a single adverse event. Historically, famine, drought, war, and diseases repeatedly pushed communities into poverty even after periods of prosperity. In the modern world, economic recession, technological disruption, and global crises continue to create instability for vulnerable populations because recovery from shocks often requires resources that the poor lack, and poverty can persist across generations. Education, skills, and human capital. Education and skill development play critical roles in economic mobility. Individuals with access to high quality education and professional training typically gain access to higher paying occupations and create and greater economic stability. However, access to education has historically been uneven across regions, social classes, and communities. In many societies, children from poor families face obstacles such as underfunded schools, inadequate nutrition, and limited access to educational resources. These disadvantages can reduce human capital development and limit future employment opportunities. As a result, poverty can reproduce itself across generations through unequal access of knowledge and skill formation. Even when education opportunities expand, labor markets may not always generate sufficient high-skilled jobs for all graduates, leaving some individuals trapped in low-paying employment despite educational attainment. Institutional and political factors. Political institutions also influence the persistence of poverty. Governments can shape economic outcomes through policies related to taxation, public spending, labor regulation, property rights, and social welfare. In some countries, strong institutional supports economic inclusion through investments in healthcare, education, infrastructure, and social safety nets. In other countries, weak governance, corruption, or political instability may hinder property reduction efforts. Political power can also influence the distribution of economic benefits. Governments that possess greater political influence may shape policies in which that protect their interests, such as favorable tax structures, regulatory advantages, or access to public resources. When political systems favor established elites, opportunities for upward mobility may remain limited for disadvantaged populations. Global inequality and the international economy. Poverty is also shaped by global economic structures. Differences in technological development, industrial capacity, educational systems, and political stability create significant disparities between countries. Some nations industrialized early and accumulated wealth through trade, manufacturing, and technological innovation, while others remain dependent on agriculture or resource extraction. Colonial history, trade relationships, debt obligations, and geopolitical dynamics have influenced the economic trajectories of many countries. As a result, global inequality persists, with some nations enjoying high standards of living while others struggling with widespread poverty. Although globalization has created opportunities for economic development in some regions, it has also exposed economies to international competition, and market fluctuations can destabilize local industries. The psychology of scarcity. Beyond structural economic factors, poverty also influences human behavior through psychological mechanisms. When individuals face constant financial pressure, limited resources, and uncertainty about basic needs, they often prioritize immediate survival over long term planning. This phenomenon is described as scarcity mindset. Scarcity can reduce cognitive bandwidth, making it more difficult to focus on long term investments such as education, savings, and entrepreneurship. Individuals experiencing chronic financial stress may be forced to make short-term decisions that appear irrational from an external perspective but rational response to immediate constraints. Social mobility and the myth of equal opportunity. Many societies promote the idea of hard work and determination can lead to upward mobility. While social mobility does occur, it is often less common than widely believed. Economic mobility depends on access to education, networks, capital, opportunities that may not be evenly distributed. Individuals who rise from poverty to prosperity often become visible examples of success stories, reinforcing the belief that mobility is widely attainable. However, statistical studies frequently show that intergenerational mobility remains limited in many societies, meaning that the economic status of parents strongly influence the economic opportunities of their children. This pattern suggests that structural factors play a significant role in shaping economic trajectories. Technological progress and new forms of inequality. Technological progress has dramatically increased global productivity and improved living standards in many countries. However, technological change can also create new forms of inequality. Automation, digital platforms, and advanced technologies often reward highly skilled workers and capital owners while reducing demand for certain types of labor. For example, automation in manufacturing has increased productivity but also reduced the number of workers needed in factories. Similarly, digital platforms allows companies to scale globally with relatively small workforce. While these innovations generate economic growth, they can also concentrate income among those who control technology and intellectual property. As technological change accelerates, societies must adapt to ensure that economic gains are broadly shared rather than concentrated among a small segment of the population. Poverty reduction and the limits of economic growth. Despite the persistence of poverty, it is important to recognize that global poverty rates have declined significantly over the past century, particularly in regions that experience rapid economic growth. Industrialization, improved agricultural productivity, expanded education, and public health interventions have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of extreme poverty. However, poverty reduction has been uneven across regions and populations. While some countries have achieved remarkable economic transformations, others continue to struggle with structural barriers that limit development. Moreover, relative poverty and inequality remain significant concerns even in wealthy societies. The persistence of poverty therefore reflects not only economic limitations but also challenges related to distribution, governance, and social institutions. Conclusion: understanding the persistence of poverty. The persistence of poverty in a world of unprecedented productivity reflects the complex interaction of economic structures, historical developments, political institutions, and demographic pressures, psychological factors, as well as global inequalities. Poverty is not simple the result of individual failures or isolated economic shocks. It is deeply embedded in the way societies organize production, distribute resources, and allocate opportunities. While economic growth has improved living standards for many people, eliminating poverty entirely requires addressing structural inequalities, expanding access to education and healthcare, and strengthening institutions and ensuring that economic gains are broadly shared. Understanding these dynamics are essential for developing policies and strategies that promote inclusive development and long-term economic stability. Human civilization has made extraordinary progress, but the challenge of poverty remains one of the central questions of modern economic and social life. Although through a comprehensive understanding of these causes can societies hope to reduce its persistence and create more equitable systems for future generations? That's the main question.